Good evening, campers, dreamers, and babysitters, and welcome to our raw reaction review for The Gorge. Yes, this kind of an oddball of a film, I would say, because this was something that I guess we knew Scott Derrickson and team were working on, but it's all been Black Phone 2. Black Phone 2 has kind of just been the talk of the town when it comes to Scott Derrickson and, all of those people who work behind that, all the actors. So this one just kind of felt like it was, I don't know, I guess the redheaded stepchild of the upcoming Scott Derrickson projects. Cause this just kind of went into production. It's got some big names to it. It's an Apple streaming movie. And we all kind of know that if a movie is going straight to streaming, it's pretty dead set going to be 50-50. So, we never 100% know if it's going to work. But I got to say, with Scott Derrickson at the helm, I went in optimistic. Luke, how'd you feel about The Gorge before you saw it?
Certainly hesitant going into it. It really did feel like an afterthought. I remember us covering it on the Sunday Scaries when it had first got announced. I think we were riding that high of Black Phone. And, I think it was really early on in the year after we had just done our previous year's best of list. Black Phone was very high for both of us. And we were excited to see what Scott Derrickson was going to be doing next. But, we covered some news, but there wasn't a ton of news of what the concept of The Gorge was. I remember, Miles Teller being cast, Anna Taylor-Joy being cast, and it was like, okay, we have a really interesting cast here. One of my hesitations was that this wasn't the dynamic duo of Scott Derrickson and C. Robert Cargill, where, those two, Sinister, Black Phone, they create magic together. This one was screenwritten by Zach Dean, and unfamiliar. I think maybe he's done some stories for the Fast franchise, but really nothing that I knew of. So certainly hesitant going into this one. Didn't really know too much about it. Didn't really have an expectation. Honestly, if I was leaning toward more one side or the other, I was leaning slightly negative on this one just because we hadn't heard anything for it. So definitely hesitant going into this one initially.
Yeah, I would also say a big piece of this is just the marketing has just not been there for this film. I feel like nobody was talking about this movie till last week. And I think a lot of that has to do with early social media reviews coming out and, people finally getting some eyes on it. That's when things started to kind of pop for it. And yeah, I mean, although you're right, C. Robert Cargill is not in the writer's chair for this one. He was still a producer. He still worked on this one pretty closely. So, you still have a little bit of that there. But yeah, it is different. It's definitely a little strange seeing him work with, out that being his man in the chair kind of thing. But I got to say, even with tempered expectations going into this, knowing it's probably more of an action movie, might not deliver so much on the horror, it might not be the Scott Derrickson I'm looking for. I gotta say, I was pretty impressed walking out of this. There was quite a swing in this movie that I think lands so well for me. Now, this isn't a perfect movie. There are certainly some elements that towards the end that I was just like, could have done without that. But I think that the midsection of this movie is so unique and so entertaining and exciting. Just when you're sitting there watching it happen and we start to get things uncovered, I should say, I thought that was worth the 2 hours I sat down to watch this alone. I could have spent so much time in the second act of this film and never once been bored.
Yes, I'll say that's certainly where this film excels. I wouldn't say I was overly impressed with the film. Like after the credits had rolled, I'd say more so satisfied with the film. Like if we ripped out that midsection of the film, I think more so my hesitancy would have been confirmed just because, this is, I guess, maybe a genre blend. I don't know if that's the accurate term, but, this does play with a lot of different beats, a lot of different genres going into it. That first, probably hour of it is really more so kind of, it's dealing with a relationship or it's kind of a romance, I guess you'd say. And
a bit of a drama.
Yeah. And, for me, I found myself okay with it. As soon as we get into the midsection of the film, I'll say prior to that, probably the 10 minutes before we get into that, I was like, this is giving me just enough to keep me interested. And I found myself losing some interest toward right before we get into that midsection of the film and we kind of amp up some more science fiction and horror elements to it. So, and then once we come out of that into the third act of something else that we get that's a bit of a different genre and completely, I'll say from that first section to that third section, I'd be like, I don't know, this would be really in the middle. I'd be leaning toward a little more negative, but I'll say that midsection absolutely delivers and for me saved it.
Yeah, and there's a big piece of me walking away from this movie who just says like, I could see this being like a mid-career John Carpenter movie. Not saying that it's to the quality of what he would do, but I'm saying like just the idea of mixing these genres where it's a little bit of action, it's a bit of fantasy, it's a bit of science fiction, horror. It's kind of just this hodgepodge of things. I thought about, of course, Escape from New York, They Live, Big Trouble in Little China a lot with this one. But also just like I love the visual elements of this movie. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I took away just from this film as opposed to something like a Black Phone that we most recently saw Derrickson do, because that movie's so small and contained and it's such a character piece which is just moving through this kind of really I wouldn't say basic horror, but it's very contained. This one, it's like, oh man, seeing what he can do with scope that's not just a Marvel movie was really, really cool. And I think that he's got a very keen eye for this stuff. There's a lot of great uses of the camera, uses of shots. And I mean, again, once we get, and we really can't get into details about it, but once we get to the midsection of this movie, man, you just feel like the restraints have been lifted and he's just going. He's just doing all of these ideas, throwing everything at you, and it just works for me. Like I just found myself pulling all of these references in my head of just like, man, this feels like this, or this feels like I've seen it here, but it all works. It all still feels unique and still feels fun. My wife, who adored this movie, literally said the best comparison I've heard yet for this. She said this feels like a arcade shooter game in the midsection, like a House of the Dead, where it's like there's so many different things that get thrown at our characters. It feels like a never-ending nightmare, and I love it.
Yeah, I'll say we're gonna keep raving about that midsection of the film. It absolutely excels as to what it's trying to do. It really encapsulate what we want going into this as a horror community or science fiction fans. It's really going to knock it out of the park for a lot of people. Now, some of the CGI for me was a little wonky, didn't necessarily work 100%, but the story is unique enough, the instance is unique enough, and what they're bringing to the table, I think, is something that you're going to have so much fun with that you're going to forgive maybe some CGI that doesn't work for you. And it's not all the CGI. Some of it does actually work in certain elements to it, I think. So, I don't think that's something that is going to be, a X on the film at all. So I think that absolutely worked. The tension is there. The eeriness is there. There are two films that I had thought about when we get into that midsection that I'm not gonna compare it to on the review, just because if you're going in this cold, I want you to go in and not have an expectation, not really knowing what you're going to be looking for. But in those elements there's a lot of eeriness. There's a lot of creativity. I want to spend more time there. I think that the pacing there was perfect. It really amps up your heart rate and you're wondering what exactly is going on. There's a convenient, little placement of a kind of a backstory of everything, I thought, but I was willing to forgive that for story wise, just so we can get more
Yeah.
connective tissue. It was rather convenient, but it does make sense when you think about it. So those elements there absolutely worked. And then when we kind of get into that third act, like a different genre, and some of it doesn't necessarily 100% work, but from my aspect, I hadn't seen something like what they're delivering in such a long time. And I'll go back to some 90s films that I grew up on that I was like, it kind of has that DNA to it, and it does work to an extent. Again, it's different from that midsection of the film, so prepare yourself for that. You're getting something a little bit different. This is a pure genre blend here when we take a look at it. And, not a perfect film like Dylan said, but honestly, this is an over 2-hour film, and I've watched it twice now. I watched this the first time, and this is the first film of 2025, and we're here early, but it's like this. I watched this one day and couldn't get it out of my head the next day, and had to go back and watch
Yeah,
it.
that's exactly how I have felt since I watched it, especially just wanting to go back and now really analyze some of what we've seen, because I think there's so many strong, unique, interesting ideas in this film. And yeah, I will say, like, the first act is very good at building character. They spend a lot of time with our characters. These aren't just throwaway, characters at all. We really get into their heads. We get to see some of what makes them tick, what their motivates them, what brings them together, and that's wonderful. And that's, again, like Luke said, that's kind of just giving you enough to keep you on board. And then that second act is such a thrill that I will say the movie for me is kind of like, we're climbing, we're starting to plateau, we absolutely elevate, and then we dive back down to that plateau. We don't blow it, but we go back down to that, where that third act, it's something where I see why they went this way. Again, kind of harkening back to some of these like 90s action films and stuff. It's just, to me, I think with how unique and how interesting and how risky that midsection was, I kind of was hoping that we'd keep that energy going.
Yep.
But they really, I think, for general audiences, for people who may be looking for something a bit more consumable, I see why they wanted to keep it a little bit more tightened at the end and kind of just be like, let's just kind of wrap this up with a bow, instead of really, leaning into some of this, which I don't think it's bad. Again, like you said, it's something we haven't seen in a long time. And I think that the film certainly earns it. It can earn that, but it does leave me at the end saying, I wouldn't be surprised if I get to the point where when I rewatch this movie, I watch the first two acts, and then by the third act, I'm kind of just like playing around on my phone, whatever. It's not like it's bad. It's not going to ruin the first time you watch it, but it's just like, again, with how unique, how cool that second act is, I just don't know why we went that way with it. Sorry,
Certainly, it's a
little
bit
buddy in here.
it's a bit jarring on your first watch. I will say it's more digestible in that second viewing when you know what to expect, and I think I had a little bit more fun with it on that second viewing just because I kind of knew the beats of the film and what to expect going into it, and I was able to kind of just have fun with it without saying, "Ugh, I wish they would have done this, or I wish they would have done that." But when you look at it, I think we've climbed to such a high elevation with that midsection of the film that even if we're on a downslope with that third act, we still end at a high enough point because I think that
Mhm.
midsection of the film is so strong. So, going into this, I think at that aspect, I think this will satisfy a lot of fans, but I think some people will have problems with it just because of the genre blend. You don't know
Yeah.
really what to expect. But when you really do look at it, I will say I recommend a second viewing on this one when you know the full story, because I think you're going to be able to digest it even that much easier knowing what to expect going into it that second viewing.
And I really do agree with you there. I think that there's going to be a good majority of people who probably don't get with this movie. They're probably not going to like how all the turns it takes. But I think there's certainly going to be a lot of horror fans that dig it. A lot of people who grew up, again, on the kind of Demolition Man, Carpenter stuff, things like that, that are willing to take risks and kind of dive into sci-fi action, a little bit of horror here and there. They're willing to kind of do that. I think more people will accept it. I think this is going to be one that I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't have the biggest pop now, but in 5-10 years,
Yes.
people are going to be like, oh, have you seen The Gorge? Oh, it's so good. Scott Derrickson did it, big name director. I mean, the last piece of this that I cannot mention before not mention before we wrap this up is the chemistry between Anya Taylor-Joy and Miles Teller is aces, dude. These two are so good. They're both great actors in their own right, but like these two just work together. They feel believable as a team and as a bit of a romantic couple. They really feel like they have each other's backs, and like they don't feel tropey in a lot of ways. And when they do feel tropey towards, I would say, the end of the film, again, it's like the movie earns it. It earns that spot to get there. And I really dug it. I think that they both crushed it in this. They're both very interesting characters. They're people that you like rooting for.
Certainly. And, starting off this video, I had said I was hesitant going into it because I didn't know really what to expect. But when we had casted Anna Taylor-Joy and Miles Teller in those lead roles, that did get me excited just because of the range of both these actors. And Anna Taylor-Joy, I mean, she's been in the horror space for a little bit. Last Night in Soho is absolutely fantastic. And, Miles Teller, not really familiar with him in the horror space at all, but I think I would love to see him do a deep dive and do something more because that, like you said, the chemistry here, I love it. Even when we're getting the backstories of both these different characters before we get into the actual main concept of the film, I was having a great time just learning about their backgrounds and knowing
Mhm.
what they were coming from. And it isn't like this hugely deep backstory and we're getting these emotional beats. We're just getting enough to get us by. And I think it's so well done in that aspect to really get us on board. And as we get deeper into the story and, we're amping up some action, the science fiction elements, things like that, we get payoffs where it's like, oh, yeah, we know their backstories of these characters, where they're coming from. So it all makes sense. It all kind of just gels and it works. Nothing seems far-fetched for me. So you're really able to lose yourself in this film. Yes, you're expect a couple different genres throughout the pacing of this film. And, some of it might not work, but I think when this film does work for you, it's going to absolutely work for you. I'm so excited for a lot of horror fans to get into that midsection of the film and to know their thoughts there because we're raving about it on the review, so it obviously worked for us and what they do bring. So for me, looking back on this one, like I said with Cuckoo last year, where I wasn't the biggest fan of that film, but I found that one to be the most rewatchable. I was so intrigued by that film and concept alone. I think The Gorge falls into that as well, where I don't think this, depending on what the year looks like, again, we're still early. I don't know if this will be in my top 10, but easily right now as we stand, this is going to be one of the most rewatchable films of 2025 for me. And it's a recommend.
I would agree. Yeah, I'm going to follow up with you on that. I was pretty set on a recommend. It does, again, have some of those little, takes the wind out of my sails slightly towards the end. I am eager to watch it again, though, because I feel like there is probably some credence to, like you said, now that you know what's coming, that it'll probably be a little easier. But yeah, I really think that this movie, again, impressed me. It was kind of, again, the redheaded stepchild, the underdog that I wasn't expecting a ton from, and I actually walked out very impressed. I think, again, the midsection does so much heavy lifting with that because it's so interesting. It's so up my alley. But I really do think that this is going to be something that will find an audience and people will enjoy. So I have no problem giving this a recommend. And yeah, I really hope that you guys all check this thing out. It's going to be streaming Apple TV Plus tomorrow. So yeah, this is going up on Thursday. So yeah, this will be out tomorrow for you on Friday. So get home from work, pop this thing on, and I guarantee you have a nice Friday night movie. You know what? That's a good way to put this. This is a good Friday night movie.
Get some popcorn, order some pizza.
Little action, little scares, little romance, little something for everybody.
It'll be Valentine's Day.
It is perfect. Yes, it's a Valentine's Day. Actually, not a bad Valentine's Day
Not
movie.
at
If you
all.
like your action stuff, you're not looking for a romance. Like, it's got a little romance, little horror. It's all good stuff in the Gorge here.
Derek
So
knew
I
what
was
he
really
was
happy with it. He did. And I do got to say, I'm very, very happy to say this is another win for him. Is it like as much of a love as like Sinister and the Black Phone for me? Probably not, but it's definitely up there. It's definitely, it's right below those, I would say. So yeah, I hope you guys check this one out. I hope that you like it. If you did, or if you didn't, feel free to drop a comment down below. Let us know what you guys thought of The Gorge. Are you looking forward to this one? Is this something that you were going to skip, but maybe now you're going to watch? Or was this something you were planning on watching? Now you're definitely going to skip. So let us know what's going on. And yeah, we got a lot of great stuff on the docket. It's been a little bit quiet here the last couple weeks. We've been prepping, we've been building, getting a lot of stuff done. So yeah, more reviews, more lists, lots of fun stuff to come. And yeah, that's going to wrap it up here for us. So until next time, I'm Dylan Newell.
And I'm Luke Janesco.
And remember, stay scared.
Do the horse shit, gonna do it live. Cause Splattercast kick it every day they live. Splattercast, gonna smash your ass. 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 Splattercast, gonna smash your ass.